Today, I speak to you from the future with the power of hindsight. And what I mean by that is the original video that I wanted to make about this issue I had with the trigger turned out to be a feature, not a bug. And I basically took apart the controller for nothing. But all is not lost. I fixed my original issue, and I think this teardown could help somebody who's looking to disassemble or replace their trigger buttons, or even the face buttons, the ABXY buttons. So feel free to skip to this part of the video if you don't really want to hear this. So basically this will be my second time unboxing the controller. The first time was the only time I unboxed it and it had that issue, so to put it back in the box, I messaged GuliKit on AliExpress. Bought it from them for $67.11 during the 25th AliExpress anniversary sale. And they basically stated over AliExpress messages that they didn't really know what was wrong, but they were going to send me a replacement pair of triggers to hopefully fix it. And yeah, that's what prompted me to make this video. So here I'm demonstrating the problem in Pokemon Legends Arceus and also the Switch's built-in input screen. And in a minute, when we go to the Pokemon footage, I'll show you what the actual cause of the problem was and how you can quote-unquote fix it. It's really a feature, not a bug. So here I'm about to showcase the problem, which is every button on the controller works but the ZR trigger. What happens when you long press the ZR trigger is that it'll start rapidly pressing it, and this was causing me an issue in games like racing games where you have to hold down the button, like GTA. You have to hold down the trigger button in order to, accelerate the car, and constantly tapping it if I went further than halfway down the trigger means instead of going full bore, full gas, full acceleration, it would just go a little bit, go a little bit, go a little bit. Kind of annoying, and I didn't really know what was going on. And here we're about to step into Pokemon Legends Arceus where I demonstrate the issue in game. But instead of watching the game, let's take a look at the manual and see how we can fix this. Let's go ahead and zoom into the manual and look towards the bottom. And enhance. And then crop. Now, zoom in. Too long didn't read. Basically, there's a built-in rapid fire functionality in the controller, and what I assumed was during the QC testing before they shipped out the controller, or maybe during shipping, maybe they knocked the box around, the rapid fire functionality got enabled, and I didn't look at the instruction manual closely enough, and I didn't realize that it was even a function. And so I contacted GuliKit saying, hey, I think there's a problem. And yeah, I'm not sure how they didn't catch that, or they didn't try to tell me, hey, maybe you should turn it off. But instead they just shrugged their shoulders and went, here's some replacement triggers. Generous, but not exactly the response I was hoping for. Alright, finally getting into the disassembly of the controller. Yeah, sorry for rambling, but I figure it'd be better to be transparent about the purchase process and the after-sales service process. So, there are 4 rubber screw covers or rubber inserts, whatever you want to call them, covering 4, I believe, Phillips screws. They seem to just be held in by friction and the rubber's natural grippiness, I guess. And you just need a pair of sharp tweezers to get them out. Just be careful though, you don't want to rip the screw covers because I don't believe they sell any extras of these, and the controller doesn't look as clean without them. Oh, and another thing about the screw covers, I'm pretty sure they're directional, as in one screw cover goes in one hole. You can't kind of mix and match, or else it won't sit flush. It'll be like sticking out all weird. So yeah, just be mindful of that. You can't see it right now because it's off screen, but I have an iFixit toolkit, which if you open the cover, it has these little squares in them, and it's really helpful for keeping things like screws and bits like the rubber screw covers, or whatever small bits you need to keep track of, in order, and keeping them from rolling around wherever. Not a sponsored video, but iFixit's the only big brand I've seen that has been adding that to their kind of toolboxes. I haven't seen any other brand adding that, so just putting that out there. And now we've taken all 4 screw covers off, 2 on the bottom of the grips and then 2 right next to both the ZR and ZL triggers on the back. And here I'm showing the PH1 screw head from my iFixit toolkit that works to unscrew the screws from the back of the controller. And another thing before I forget, I'm pretty certain all 4 screws are the exact same size and length, so you can interchange them, but someone confirm that for me, maybe in the comments. Alright, I'm just gonna hit the turbo button and speed past this because it's basically just unscrewing screws. I mean, everyone knows how to unscrew screws, right? Alright, now we get to one of the more difficult parts of this assembly. It's basically cracking the controller in half, unsnapping all those clips on the shells so it basically unhalves the sandwich, if that makes sense. In the end, what was successful was using a few guitar picks from the iFixit toolkit that I had and just shoving the very tip into the gap between the 2 halves of the shell and just pressing down wherever I felt a raised edge with basically the tip of the guitar pick. And I knew that was a clip, so I would push the guitar pick into that little protrusion and hopefully unclip the clips holding it together. However, what that unfortunately did was when I reassembled the controller, there was a small gap on, I believe, the left side. Was it? You'll see later in the video, but basically it's like kind of a small gap, I think, because either I didn't clip it in right or I broke the clip while doing this, and so it doesn't snap all the way together. It's not loose to the point where I can, feel it click if I squeeze the case, or where I really feel like debris can get in, but still kind of unsightly. Boom, there you go. Now you've got both halves basically busted wide open. Here's a good look at the back half of the controller. So I believe where you clip those whatever add-ons, maybe for like fighting games or something, the paddles. And here's the PCB and battery and controllers, or not controllers, the triggers and the rumble motors. And here I'm messing with the ZR trigger because that was the one I was having problems with, and I at the time believed it was in fact a hardware issue, not a software one. But I've went ahead and just left this footage in just in case you had any problems with your ZR trigger and you needed to see how they worked. Now we're on to unscrewing the PCB to expose the second PCB underneath and to get easier access to the battery connector. But before you can actually take the top PCB out, you have to unplug both the rumble motors. Get the wires out of the way because we're going to need to basically kind of hinge the PCB out. It's a really tight fit. There's just barely enough room to lift the PCB out of the controller housing. And also, don't forget to unplug the ribbon cable that makes this controller function. Ask me how I know that. Well, actually you're about to find out in a few short minutes. So there's 5 screws holding in the top PCB, and they're different lengths, I believe, so I would keep track of which ones go where. So before we can lift the motherboard out of the controller shell, we have to unplug the ribbon cable. So some notes about the ribbon cable. I've kind of noticed it has around 3 stages. So the first stage is, I guess, all the way up. So you lift it all the way up, and that allows the ribbon cable to slide in and out at ease without any resistance. Next is halfway down. So basically it's putting the ribbon cable latch down until you feel resistance, and then there's finally all the way flat down, which is when you just, what I had to do was I had to crank the ribbon cable latch down flat. It did not feel right, but I had to do it because what ended up happening if I didn't latch it all the way down was the controller just would not turn on. It would charge, but it just would not turn on. And you're about to see that coming up. But anyways, back to the current video. So you can see I've unplugged the ribbon cable and I'm just slowly kind of levering it out now. I don't even know what I was doing. I was just kind of yanking, pulling, seeing if I could get it out of the controller housing. And in order to pull the thumbsticks through the controller housing, I had to take off the grips that came with the controller. As you can see, there's just not a lot of room to get the PCB out. It's really tight fit. You have to be careful, kind of go slow at it, kind of be persistent at it. It's really quite annoying. But when you finally do get it out, you have better access to the face buttons and the trigger assembly mechanism itself, so you can actually replace it. And here I'm unplugging the battery just for safety's sake, because I found during this repair, and as you'll see in the video coming up ahead, it was quite easy to accidentally turn this controller on when you were not intending to. Here I'm just unscrewing the screws that keep the trigger assembly attached to the controller housing. And there is the trigger assembly. Just be careful because there's 2 springs in there, one smaller one bigger one, and they both really like to jump out, especially if you're replacing the triggers, as we'll be attempting to do here. pop it back in just to say, be careful when you put your trigger back in, because the small spring can jump and fly out of your hand like really easily. It's not really required to reassemble the controller. You don't have to have it, but it does make the feel of the ZR button feel a bit off. Having it missing feels kind of weird. To reassemble, just go ahead and screw the 2 screws that are holding the ZR trigger back into the controller housing. And I normally wouldn't recommend this because you usually want to keep everything off, but because the battery connector is so hard to get to when the top PCB is laid in, I just go ahead and plug it in while I still can. And here I'm trying to thread the thumbsticks through the holes in the controller housing. It's really tight, so you just have to kind of go slowly and carefully at it. Make sure the rumble controller connectors are out of the way, otherwise you could rip them or trap them underneath the PCB when you're trying to fit it into the housing. I eventually give up and I just take the thumb caps off the Hall effect joysticks, but don't take them off all the way like I'm about to, because if you take the plastics off, it turns out you can't just slide them back in when you have the PCB sitting as it should inside the housing. The plastic kind of caps, they're too wide to fit inside the opening in the controller housing for the joysticks to poke out, so yeah, don't take them all the way off. If you must, just take the very tips off where the rubber parts. And here I'm about to make a pretty big mistake. When I'm slotting the ribbon cable back into the motherboard, I don't click the ribbon cable latch all the way down. I only managed to latch it halfway down, meaning I kind of stopped when there was a bunch of resistance, which is not how you're supposed to do it because it's not flat. You'll see a side profile of it near the end of the video, but yeah, the way you know if the ribbon cable is good or not is it should be flat. When it's latched all the way down, it should just be flat. But hindsight is 20/20, and past me will just screw the screws in, blissfully unaware of the impending doom that the controller won't turn on. And here I'm about to find out that the round thumb cap won't actually fit in the opening in the controller housing. So I have to take it back all apart, unscrew everything, and put the round thumb cap back on the joystick. And on my second try, I still don't latch it down correctly. So just a quick tip during reassembly. when you're screwing into plastic and you're not exactly sure if your screws align quite right with the screw threads, what you can do is you can put the screw into the hole, then back it out until you feel the screw drop into the screw hole with an audible click. And once you feel and hear that, you'll know you're good to start screwing it in. It's a little hard to describe with words, but I think you'll get the idea if you tried it yourself. And after I get everything reassembled, I try to power it on just to see nothing. I wonder why that is. Yeah, charging works, but powering on does not. So we've got to take it apart for round 2. And if you ever need to clean or grease up the ABXY face buttons, you can easily do so here. And another thing to watch out for is the face buttons. So as I just showed, the face buttons can kind of rotate and spin around, especially as you're placing the top PCB into the controller housing. Right, so here I'm about to show off the proper way to latch down this ribbon cable. So I haven't inserted my ribbon cable yet, but you can see the latch, that's the black part underneath the white part of the ribbon cable connector that we're about to zoom in on. Yeah, you see how that black part is flat? You don't want the black latch to be sticking up like an acute angle when you view it from the side. You want it to be flat when that ribbon cable is inserted inside. So just making sure that the ribbon cable is inserted all the way in, and then I make sure I push the latch all the way down so it's completely flat. And remember when I was talking about earlier about being careful with the face buttons? Yeah, this is why. I don't even notice it at first, but the A button is tilted a little bit, and that makes pressing it kind of difficult. And here I test the manual's quote-unquote solution. So basically you hold the button in the middle and then you hold the trigger or the button that you want to be rapid fire, and then how long or how many vibrations it is indicates what mode it is in. And while my ZR trigger issue is fixed, I've now got to fix the A button issue. So let's go ahead and disassemble it yet again. So 4 screws on the back, then it's 5 screws holding in the PCB, and that gives you access to the face buttons and the joysticks and the ZL triggers. Oh, but don't forget, you gotta unplug the rumble motor connectors. So just a quick little shortcut, you don't actually have to unscrew and take out all the screws. You can just unscrew all the screws and just slightly lift the PCB. And that way you can just kind of flick the A button and make it go into its proper position. And here is a prime example of why you should check before you screw things down. Otherwise, you just have to redo them. But on the bright side, I can show you the technique I mentioned earlier, which is you unscrew all the screws, all 5 screws holding in the top PCB, and then instead of taking them out, you just leave them where they are, and then you just lift up one side of the PCB, and then you flick the face button you want to sit properly. And then you double check and you look at it to make sure it's actually sitting properly before you go ahead and screw everything down. Yeah, so unfortunately my trick didn't end up working because the button was just too tweaked, and I ended up having to take some tweezers to straighten it out. And here I'm just showing that with the rapid fire functionality disabled, how the controller behaves in XInputChecker.